"Sir, this seating is reserved." The voice was sharp, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. It sliced through the humid South Carolina air, a sound as crisp as the creases on the young officer's trousers. John Bishop turned his head slowly, his gaze lifting from the empty parade deck where his son would soon stand as a United States Marine. The man addressing him was a captain, his rank gleaming on his collar, his posture a ramrod of institutional pride. He couldn't have been more than 28, with a face that hadn't yet earned any real lines, just the temporary ones of impatience. John, by contrast, was a man carved from old, weathered wood. His polo shirt was a faded blue, soft from 1,000 washings, and his jeans were worn thin at the knees. He stood in the front row of bleachers, a section cordoned off with a simple brass stanchion and a red velvet rope. "I was told to sit here," John said, his voice quiet and gravelly, like stones rolling in a slow river. It was the voice of a man who didn't waste words. The captain's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan, taking in the frayed collar, the cheap digital watch, and the scuffed work boots. The assessment was instantaneous and unflattering. "And who exactly told you that?" Captain Sterling asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "A gunnery sergeant at the gate. He checked my name on a list." Sterling's lips tightened into a smirk. It was a look of profound disbelief, as if John had just claimed to have arrived by unicorn. "I think there's been a mistake. This section is for distinguished visitors. Colonels, generals, civilian dignitaries, not general admission." He gestured vaguely toward the packed stands further back, where hundreds of families were jostling for position, their bright civilian clothes a chaotic tapestry against the military precision of the base. John's eyes, a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to hold the memory of distant oceans, simply watched the captain. There was no anger in them, no defensiveness, just a deep, unshakable calm that seemed to unnerve the officer even more. "My name is Bishop. I'm here for my son, Private Jacob Bishop." Captain Sterling let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's wonderful, sir. I'm sure you're very proud. But every parent here is proud. It doesn't entitle you to a front-row seat next to the Commandant's representative. Now, if you'll please move along before I have to find an MP to escort you." From 50 feet away, Sergeant Major Kent watched the exchange. He stood with his arms crossed, his own uniform a testament to 30 years of service. Every ribbon on his chest told a story, and his eyes, narrowed against the morning sun, missed nothing. He'd seen the captain, Sterling, strutting around the parade deck all morning, a peacock in freshly starched camis, looking for infractions to correct. Now he had his sights on the old man in the faded polo. At first, Kent felt a familiar annoyance. He knew the type. Some civilian who felt entitled, who didn't understand the rules. But as he watched, something felt off. The old man wasn't arguing. He wasn't pleading. He was just standing there. Still. There was an economy of motion to him that was distinctly familiar to the sergeant major. While the captain postured and gestured, the old man remained rooted to the spot, his weight perfectly balanced, his head on a swivel, subtly taking in his surroundings even while focused on the officer in front of him. It was the posture of a man who had spent a lifetime being aware of threats. Sterling, in his youthful arrogance, saw only a stubborn old civilian. Kent saw something else. He saw a predator's stillness. The captain grew more agitated by the man's silence. He took a half-step forward, invading John's personal space. "Are you deaf? I gave you a lawful order to move. This is a secure military installation." He reached out and grabbed John's arm, intending to steer him away. It was a mistake. The moment the captain's fingers touched his arm, John's sleeve slid up an inch, maybe 2. The motion was slight, but under the bright sun, it was enough. On the weathered skin of John Bishop's forearm, a tattoo was revealed. It was old, the ink faded to a murky green-black, the lines blurred by decades of sun and salt. but the image was unmistakable. An eagle, clutching an anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. The SEAL Trident. Kent's breath caught in his chest. His blood ran cold. It wasn't just any trident. It was an old-style one, the kind you didn't see much anymore. And just below it, almost lost in the faded lines, were two small, barely there additions. A tiny star and a whisper of a letter. A marker for a specific shadowy unit that officially didn't exist. Captain Sterling didn't notice, or if he did, he dismissed it as some cheap biker tattoo, a pathetic attempt to claim a valor he'd never earned. His grip tightened on John's arm. "All right, that's it. You're coming with me." But John didn't move. He didn't have to. The captain, for all his gym-honed strength, might as well have been trying to move one of the ancient live oaks that dotted the island. John's arm was like granite. His calm blue eyes finally met Sterling's, and for the first time, the captain saw something flicker in their depths. It wasn't anger. It was something far colder, far more final. It was the look of a man who had made life or death decisions in the blink of an eye, and the captain suddenly felt a primal chill, a deep-seated instinct that he was making a terrible, terrible mistake. He was out of his depth, and the water was rising fast. Sergeant Major Kent started moving. He didn't run. His stride was measured, purposeful. Every Marine on that deck knew the Sergeant Major's walk. It was the walk of unquestionable authority, the gait of a man who had forgotten more about leadership than Captain Sterling would ever know. He wasn't intervening to save the old man. He was intervening to save the captain from a career-ending, soul-shattering act of professional suicide. The arrogance of a young officer confronting a living ghost was a tragedy Kent felt honor-bound to prevent, if he could. He saw the faint tremor in Sterling's hand as he held the old man's arm, the dawning realization that he had grabbed hold of something he could not control. Meanwhile, John Bishop was somewhere else entirely. The captain's touch, the humid air, the shouts of the drill instructors in the distance. It all melted away. For a split second, he wasn't on Paris Island. He was back in the Hindu Kush, the air thin and tasting of dust and cordite. He felt the weight of his gear, the familiar cold steel of his rifle. He remembered the face of a young Marine, barely older than his own son was now, bleeding out in his arms, his eyes wide with shock and fear. The memory was a ghost, a scar on his soul that never faded. It was for that boy, and all the others like him, that he'd endured everything. He came back to himself with a slow blink, his focus returning to the sputtering captain. The anger he felt was a distant, controlled thing, an old engine he rarely started. He was here for Jacob. That was all that mattered. Just as Sergeant Major Kent was 10 yards away, the crunch of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. A gleaming black staff car pulled to a stop behind the bleachers. The NCOs and junior officers in the vicinity instinctively stiffened, their postures sharpening. The rear door opened and out stepped a man whose uniform was adorned with 2 silver stars. Major General Croft, the commanding general of the entire Marine Corps recruit depot, had arrived. He was a man whose presence commanded immediate silence and respect. He adjusted his cover, his eyes sweeping the scene, expecting to see a perfectly orchestrated ceremony. Instead, he saw one of his captains physically manhandling a civilian in the VIP section. A frown creased his forehead. He started forward, his expression thunderous, ready to tear a strip off the young officer who was making a spectacle of himself. Captain Sterling saw the general approaching, and his blood turned to ice. He instantly released John's arm as if it were red hot. He snapped to attention, his hand flying up in a salute. "General, sir, this man was refusing to leave the reserved area. I was just—" He stopped. The general wasn't looking at him. He had walked right past him, his eyes locked on the old man in the faded polo shirt. General Croft's stern, authoritative face slackened in pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened slightly. "John?" he breathed. the name a quiet explosion in the tense air. John Bishop? My God, is that really you? The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Captain Sterling. The name meant nothing to him, but the general's tone, a mixture of awe, reverence, and disbelief, was terrifying. This wasn't the voice of a general addressing a problematic civilian. It was the voice of a man meeting a hero. John offered a small, tired smile. "Hello, Marcus. It's been a while." General Croft took another step closer, his eyes scanning John's face, then dropping to the faded tattoo on his forearm. He saw it, and his expression solidified from shock into something profound, a deep, unshakable respect. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon the now trembling Captain Sterling. The general's voice, when it came, was no longer loud. It was low, guttural, and colder than a grave. "Captain," he said, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence, "do you have any earthly idea who you are speaking to?" Before Sterling could stammer out an answer, a response he could not possibly have formulated, General Croft did something that sent a shock wave through every Marine who witnessed it. He pivoted on his heel, facing John Bishop directly. His back went ramrod straight, his chin tucked in. He snapped to the most rigid, perfect position of attention he had executed since he was a recruit on this very same parade deck. His hand came up in a salute so sharp, so precise it seemed to slice the air. It was a gesture of utter, unconditional respect, a two-star general honoring a man in a worn-out polo. "Master Chief!" The general's voice boomed, clear and strong, carrying across the now silent assembly area. "It is an honor to see you again, sir." A collective gasp went through the nearby crowd of families and officers. Master Chief? That was a Navy rank. And the "sir" at the end, from a general to an enlisted man, was a breach of protocol so immense it could only mean one thing. The man being saluted was a legend. Sergeant Major Kent, who had stopped a few feet away, followed the general's lead. He, too, snapped to attention and rendered a salute, his weathered face a mask of solemn respect. He had known. The moment he saw the Trident, he had known. Captain Sterling stood frozen, his own hand still awkwardly held in a salute to the general, his mind utterly failing to process the scene unfolding before him. He felt the blood drain from his face. The world had been turned upside down. The insignificant, stubborn old man was somebody, a general called Sir. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the distant cry of a seagull and the frantic thumping of Sterling's own heart. The general held his salute, his eyes locked on John's. A silent communication passing between two warriors who had shared something deeper than rank or branch of service. It was a bond forged in fire and blood, a lifetime ago in a forgotten valley on the other side of the world. John finally broke the silence. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the acknowledgment he offered, and all the general needed. Croft dropped his salute and turned back to the petrified captain. "Captain Sterling," General Croft began, his voice dangerously calm. "Let me educate you. You are standing in the presence of Master Chief Petty Officer John Bishop, United States Navy, retired." He paused, letting the weight of the title sink in. "While you were likely in grade school, this man was engaged in Operation Nightingale. Ever heard of it?" "No, of course you haven't. It's still classified." "But I was there. I was a lieutenant, trapped with my platoon in a box canyon, outnumbered 10-1. We were dead. Done. Radio was out, ammo was low, and the enemy was closing in for the kill." The general's eyes took on a distant, haunted look. "For 6 hours we fought, and then, when there was no hope left, the sky went quiet. We thought it was over, but it wasn't. It was him. Master Chief Bishop and his three-man team came over that ridge like ghosts. They had humped 20 miles through the mountains after their helicopter was shot down, and they came for us. He pointed a finger, not at John, but at the empty space where the memory lived. This man single-handedly suppressed 3 machine gun nests while his team organized our wounded. He personally carried my radio operator, a boy who'd taken a round to the leg, 2 clicks to the extraction zone. He did all of this after being wounded himself. He finally looked at John. For his actions that day, he was awarded the Navy Cross. To go along with his Silver Star, his 4 Bronze Stars with Valor, and his 3 Purple Hearts. Every word was a hammer blow to Captain Sterling's pride, his arrogance, his entire world view. He looked at John Bishop, at the faded shirt and the tired eyes, and saw him for the first time. He saw the quiet strength, the lines of pain and sacrifice etched around his mouth. He saw a giant who had been content to stand in the shadows. The captain's face was ashen, his body rigid with shame. He wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. He had demanded respect for his uniform from a man who had bled for every thread of it, a man whose quiet dignity was more profound than any rank or decoration. The sergeant major stepped forward. "General, I can handle the captain." Croft nodded curtly. "See that you do. I don't want to see his face again today." The sergeant major placed a firm hand on Sterling's shoulder. "Let's go for a walk, Captain." The words were a quiet order, but they carried the force of a hurricane. Sterling, looking like a ghost, allowed himself to be led away, his career in tatters, his spirit broken. He cast one last, horrified look back at the man he had so casually dismissed. John watched them go, his expression unreadable. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't wanted a scene or a spectacle. He was just a father, here to see his son on the most important day of his young life. The pomp and circumstance of the military was a life he had left behind, a world of ghosts and painful memories. He had traded it for quiet mornings, a simple job fixing boat engines, and the all-consuming, deeply rewarding task of raising a boy on his own. General Croft let out a long breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. "I'm sorry about that, John, truly. The arrogance of some of these new officers, they haven't seen enough to learn humility." John just shook his head. "He's young. He'll learn." There was a profound grace in his words, an absence of malice that was more striking than any anger could have been. Forgiveness, offered so easily by a man who had every right to be furious. "What are you doing here?" the general asked again, his tone now warm, personal. "My boy, Jacob, he's graduating today," John said, and for the first time a genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. He wanted to be a Marine, like the ones you led. A flicker of emotion crossed the general's face. "He's a good man, Marcus. You taught him well." The parade was beginning. The band struck up the first notes of the national anthem, and the crisp, rhythmic sound of marching boots filled the air. The first platoon of new Marines stepped onto the parade deck, their movements synchronized, their faces set with a mixture of pride and nervous energy. General Croft put a hand on John's shoulder. "Stay here, right here with me. You've earned this seat more than anyone." John nodded, his eyes scanning the rows of young men in their dress blues, searching for one face among the many. He found him in the 3rd rank. Jacob, his son. He looked different. Taller somehow. Leaner. The boyish softness was gone from his jaw, replaced by a new, hard-earned confidence. He marched with a precision that made John's heart swell with a fierce, powerful pride that eclipsed any medal he had ever received. As Jacob's platoon passed the reviewing stand, his eyes briefly flicked towards the VIP section. He saw his father, the man in the faded polo and worn jeans, standing not in the back, but in the front row, and he was standing next to the base's commanding general. Jacob's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion and surprise, before his training took over and his gaze snapped back to front. He had always known his dad was quiet, that he'd been in the Navy a long time ago, but he had never understood. He'd never known the depth of the waters his father had navigated. Now, seeing him standing beside a general who looked at him with such open respect, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. After the ceremony was dismissed, the parade deck dissolved into a joyous chaos of families finding their new Marines. Jacob broke away from the crowd, making a beeline for his father. He was still stiff in his new uniform, his movements formal. "Dad?" he said, his voice full of questions he didn't know how to ask. John pulled his son into a fierce hug, clapping him on the back. The rigid Marine posture melted away, and for a moment he was just a boy again, hugging his father. "I'm proud of you, son," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "So proud." What was that all about?" Jacob asked, pulling back, gesturing towards the general who was now speaking with some other officers but still occasionally glancing over with a smile. "The general, he knew you." John looked at his son, at the uniform he wore, the same uniform as the men he had pulled from the fire all those years ago. He saw the same honor, the same commitment, the same spark of selfless courage. "We served together a long time ago," John said simply. "He was a good lieutenant. I'm glad to see he became a good general." It was a massive understatement, a deflection born of a lifetime of humility. Jacob knew there was more to it, a vast, untold story behind his father's simple words, but he also knew that today wasn't the day to ask. Today was about his own beginning, not his father's past. He looked at his dad, really looked at him, and saw not just the quiet, hard-working man who had raised him, but the shadow of the warrior he had been. He finally understood that the quiet was not emptiness. It was a container for things too heavy to speak of. The strength he had always admired in his father wasn't just from physical labor, it was from carrying the weight of the world and never letting it show. The faded tattoo on his father's arm suddenly seemed like a sacred text, a story he was only just beginning to learn how to read. "Thank you, Dad," Jacob said, his voice cracking slightly. "For everything." John just smiled, clapping his son's shoulder again. "Let's go get some lunch, Marine. You've earned it." As they walked away together, a father and his son, the general watched them go. He saw the Master Chief, the legend, the ghost of Operation Nightingale, fade back into what he had always wanted to be, just a dad. And in that moment, the general understood that of all the battles John Bishop had ever won, this one, raising a fine young man to serve with honor, was his greatest victory.